Amen. Well, it is the last Sunday of our liturgical year. Next week is First Advent, and so next week we'll be saying Happy New Year. This is it. And appropriately, on this Sunday, we celebrate Christ as the King of Kings, the reign of Christ. So the question, which we did not hear today in this reading, the question posed by Pilate directly after Jesus says what he said about those who belong to the truth, listen to my voice. Pilate says, what is truth? What is truth? That's an important concept in John. It runs all through John. What is truth? The language of the passage is really, this whole reading, it's really pretty straightforward. Like voice means voice, right? World means world. King means king. There aren't those layers that we sometimes find when we are translating from the ancient languages. So shalom does not mean peace, for example. That's not going on here. It's one layer. But if you look at that word truth, you find how important that concept is to John. Matthew uses that word truth once. Mark twice. Luke 3 times. John uses it 26 times. It is a crucial concept to him. What is truth? That's what we're working with today. So what's happened is Jesus' accusers have brought him to the praetorium, to Pilate's headquarters, which was built, that was built on the north wall of the temple, and it included Pilate's residence and the military barracks, and then a big courtyard where a judgment was given on cases. Now, Pilate didn't live there. He lived in Caesarea, but he came every year to Jerusalem to keep the peace during the Passover. That was his job, to keep the peace. And so they bring Jesus there, but they don't come in. The chief priests and Pharisees do not enter that complex, because if they did that, it would make them unclean. And they want to be able to celebrate the Passover. Numbers 9, 10, and 11 says if somebody's unclean at the time of the Passover, they have to put off celebrating it for 30 days. So they don't want to be in that situation. They're priests. They have a role. Kind of like if my COVID test came up positive. Right? They kind of need to be on the job. And so they're going to stay out of this unclean place. And of course the Pharisees try to never be unclean, because clean was their whole culture. This place that Pilate's in is also called the Antonia Fortress. And an interesting thing is happening here that is similar to what we talked about last week when the scene changes, because Pilate's walking back and forth because the accusers won't come in. Pilate's in the courtyard and he goes out to the gates. Then he's in the courtyard and he goes out to the gates. So there's this back and forth. And it really helps to emphasize what's happening here. Because there are two concepts in play around what is a king. What is a king? For the Jewish leadership, a king is the Messiah, the God-sent spiritual leader of their religion. They also expect that he will overthrow Rome, but his main and primary role is to heal Israel and bring Israel back to full covenant with God and to lead their religion. Whereas Pilate, for Pilate, a king is a political figure. Beginning, middle, and end political. For Pilate, a king rules an area. Now, of course, the emperor rules all the kings. The emperor is king of the kings. But a king rules an area. And in fact, for Pilate, there's another contender for that title, because Herod wants to be proclaimed king of the Jews by the Roman hierarchy, Roman structure. He never did attain that. His father had been, he wanted to be, but he never attained that. But, so Pilate knows a fellow who's politically aspires to be the ruler. It's a political role for Pilate. And here's an interesting thing about that. Neither one cares about the other's view of a king. The Jews really don't care about the political role, and Pilate really doesn't care about the spiritual role. When Jesus says, do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? And Pilate, with great disdain, says, I'm not a Jew, am I? He's not interested. He doesn't care. For him, it matters little, unless that king moves over to political. He would be perfectly happy for them to have a spiritual leader. In the same way, the Jews in 1915, John 19:15, when Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests say, we have no king but Caesar. They don't really care about the political setup of kingship. They want this fellow who aspires to be their spiritual leader to die. That's their concern. So each of these two views, mainly concerned about themselves and not super concerned about the other. What is truth? What is truth? Jesus says to Pilate, for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Because the truth is, neither of those is the final word on a king. Neither one of those is really the full definition of a king the way Jesus is king. Emily Towns writes it beautifully. God truly is a God of love and grace, who wills the blessings of creation in our lives. That truth encompasses everything. We are those who listen to the voice of Christ, and we know that God encompasses everything. It's not a hierarchy. It's not some hierarchy with political here, and then a little bit better spiritual, and then up over everything God. It is a circle encompassing those two definitions. God is everything. God is both truths and more. God is everything. Now, it's apparent to us, most of us, here in this room, because we're a group of people who got up and came to church today, right? So it's apparent to most of us that our first loyalty is to God above political leaders. Right? None of us prioritizes the political leaders of our time over our loyalty to God and to Christ. What might surprise a few people is that our basic loyalty belongs not to the church, not to Christianity, not to, dare I say it, not even to being Episcopal, but rather to Christ. The church is a way to Christ. Christianity is the way to Christ. But our loyalty is to Jesus, not any particular way of practicing that spirituality. We don't sacrifice Christ to that. Everything serves him. That's clear with political, not so clear with church, but God is our highest priority. That's the truth that's so important to John. So what does that mean for us? We're followers of Christ. We are the people that Jesus spoke of before Pilate. Those who belong to the truth. Those who listen to his voice. It means that we are on a constant journey of creative self-discovery. Constant. That we are constantly renewed, constantly transformed, constantly led in new ways. It's a beautiful thing to belong to the truth. Because it leads us to new things all the time. We never are bored if we are believers in that. Elizabeth Towns again. Truth can be transforming if we seek it through discerning obedience that asks us to look deeply into who we are and what we have become, to try to live into what we can and should be. What is truth? Something happened at 8 o'clock this morning that really illustrates this for me. It's just an example of this for me. Which is, there's a fellow named Chris who was out on the steps at the building next door. And Chris was raising lament to God. I went out and talked with him just before the 8 o'clock service, and he was distraught. He felt ill. His stomach was bothering him. I gave him some water and said, I have to go to church right now. Come see me this week. I'd love to spend some time talking with you. And I left, and as I left, he wailed, and then he would pause and wail again, and you could really hear it in here. And we talked about it at the Peace with the folks who were here at 8 o'clock. And I said, what Chris does in raising lament the way he is, his life had taken a turn for the worse, and he was wailing about it, is remind me that part of my entitlement in the world is that I have set a normal. I have an idea of what's normal, right? And I expect normal in my life. And when I don't see normal, Enneagram 8, I take action to correct that, right? So that's part of how I move through the world because of the entitlement I have. Well, for me, normal, I never sit on the stairs and wail. That isn't something that I don't raise lament like that. I could probably look at raising lament a little better and a little more, but I don't. That's not normal for me. But it is for Chris. God encompasses both of those for me and Chris. God puts his arms around all of that. We're both in God's circle. So rather than me impose a normal and say, you need to be quiet or you're going to disturb our worship, we embrace and love and honor Chris. I did. In his, what for me is a non-normal expression. And he embraced and loved me in mine. That's the truth journey we're on. That's how God challenges us with the Holy Spirit and the truth. The truth is, God is the God of all of us. Of those of us in the building and of those of us out of the building. Who are we? What have we become? transformation God calls us to as we listen to the voice of Christ, as we seek to belong to the truth. So next week is First Advent. It's a great time to be asking ourselves those questions. It's a wonderful season for renewal and transformation and new joys, individually